Sidra, and thanks everyone for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be delivering another webinar. This one really is about changing expectations. It's about a fairly transformational shift that's happening, not just in sustainability, but in society more generally. And it's expectations around transparency and around information availability. And so we're going to be looking at that in terms of the implications for sustainability standards today and how they're responding. So obviously most of you know ICL is a membership organization. We have sustainability standards as members. These are them, and they represent a variety of sectors and industries. They also represent a variety of approaches, and sustainability standards are in many ways thinking about the strategies that they use to achieve our collective sustainability outcomes. And part of that is thinking about how data and data tools can help them to do better, to make information more readily available, to provide value to producers and actors in the supply chain, and really to just be more effective. And so you look at these systems and they're all fairly traditional. They fit a model, but they're not the only players in the sustainability landscape. And if you look outside of the traditional ICL membership type organization, you start to see a lot of other initiatives, many of which complement and work closely with sustainability standards, but that are also effectively trying to enable better transparency of sustainability information. So you get everything from Global Forest Watch, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is geospatial mapping, essentially. You've got worker voice empowerment tools, whether that's cell phones or surveys. You've got supply chain trade flows with Trace, even company-owned initiatives like Cocoa Life, or newer technologies like blockchain and provenance is referenced here. All of these tools are essentially trying to do a similar thing, which is make information more readily available about supply chain practices and the impacts of those practices. And I think it's really important that we see how these types of tools and how sustainability standards can take advantage of the advances in technology and information availability to be more efficient at driving the sustainability equation. So what are those drivers? Well, from a company perspective, first and foremost, there are legal obligations, whether those are due diligence obligations or disclosure. There's an increasing trend for governments, particularly in Europe, but also in the US, to put in place requirements for companies to report on the likelihood of whether it's modern slavery or deforestation in their supply chains, and to actually do the due diligence of looking into their supply chains. And that requires a level of transparency and awareness of where your contractors are, your not just your first tier suppliers, but second and third tier, potentially even subcontractors. France's new duty of vigilance law goes further than previous ones in also including those subcontractors. And I think that is only going to be a trend that continues to become more prominent. You've also got to look at this from that information ubiquity role and expectations about company performance and companies seeing critical social and environmental issues as risks to be managed, whether that's deforestation in their supply chains or child labor. When you get into disclosure, it's climate change disclosure, the impacts of climate change on your business. And all of these things are essentially becoming core business risks that need to be managed. And then more at a cultural level, there's this culture shift, this expectation within society that information will be available in the form that people want it almost instantaneously. And that's a combination of technology and the role that social media plays. And it really is shifting the way that we think about what is acceptable in terms of the level of transparency and the amount of information and the form that that takes, and how that's made available. So the implications for different actors in the supply chain and their changing expectations. If you look at retailers and manufacturers, again, this is largely significantly about risk management and reputation, but it's also in some cases about security of supply. So this is about understanding where your supply comes from, and in the case of larger companies, developing relationships and formal arrangements through the supply chain. So you get much more consolidation of supply chains. It's also interesting to see that leading companies at least are looking to more concrete data about what the actual changes on the ground. How are these interventions, whether they're sustainability standards or otherwise, actually changing practices? And so there's a shift within companies to look more at what's the specific data related to the issues that we care about. And some of that means that you focus on just a few key issues. And again, that takes a risk perspective. Is it all about getting deforestation out of the supply chain? Or are there deeper issues around societal well-being, or at least worker well-being? And so then you get that fourth point, which is data as capacity building. And this is a recognition that data really can be used both to provide information to consumers, to retailers and manufacturers, but then also be used as a tool for capacity building, for improving performance, for identifying where are the weaknesses or the areas for potential improvement within a production system. And from the producer and supplier perspective, of course, that second point, better value proposition, it refers exactly to that there are benefits from having access to this data, as well as the costs of providing it. So you have to try to ensure that there is benefits coming back to the producers and suppliers. Data ownership and control is really something that is going to be a significant issue going forward. Obviously, there's a lot of data flowing around, a lot of uses of that data that aren't always expected or anticipated when it's first collected, and just recognizing that we need to understand who owns the data and who has control of how it's used is an important issue, particularly for empowerment. So with these changing drivers and expectations, sustainability standards recognize that they need to respond. And we've been working with our members over the last couple of years to look towards the future of sustainability standards and what those might look like. And we have a data vision. This is an informal vision. It isn't something that's formally been adopted by sustainability standards, but is kind of a point to aim towards for the activities that we're working on with members. And what we anticipate, or what we'd like to see and help to bring about, is that sustainability standards become efficient, data-driven, and results-focused, that they're providing near real-time understanding of performance and risk, and that they're creating measurable value for all stakeholders in the supply chain. And I think it's ambitious, but I think it's where sustainability standards need to go. And so as a result, within our innovations program, we've taken as a theme for that program standard systems as better data managers. And we fundamentally believe that over the next 3 to 5 years, sustainability standards need to put data at the forefront of their operations to really ensure that they're efficiently capturing information about performance and using that to improve the system as a whole. And so we have a number of activities that we're engaged in to support sustainability standards to become better data managers. The one that I'm working most closely with my colleague Anna Garson is on risk approaches to assurance. And this isn't risk assessment, or it isn't risk in a traditional sense. It's more thinking about how do we capture better sources, multiple sources of information that give us a more robust picture about performance. So how do we use the data we have, like from the audit process or from monitoring and evaluation, but how do we complement that with other sources of information, satellite data, worker interviews, automated sensor data, public databases. How do we pull all those different sources of information together to get a more real-time understanding of performance and an understanding of where those risks are, so that we can focus not just our compliance activities, but also our capacity building and support on those higher risk areas before they become problematic. On the monitoring and evaluation side, we're looking at well, we've had quite a few years of supporting members to strengthen their monitoring evaluation systems. We're currently doing work on level 2 data, which is outcomes data, which I think is what a lot of stakeholders care most about. And we're also thinking about collective indicators. Part of this is trying to see how we can get information that is compatible between systems, so that we can get an understanding of collective impact across a number of different sustainability standards. And then a new piece of work that I think is critically important. We have to recognize this isn't as easy as putting the newest, fanciest technology in place, but it's also about a culture shift. It's about having the language to understand what data can do for you and how to manage that data. And so we have a program on data basics, essentially putting the foundations in place. And the reason for that is because there are so many challenges associated with good data management. And I think this is, this applies to our data basics program, but at the same time, I think is generically applicable across any organization that is thinking about making better use of data. So recognizing that there are technical challenges around data integrity and confidentiality. Data leaks obviously are very high profile these days. How do we best manage for that and assure our users that we have the systems in place to maintain the integrity of their data? How do we ensure that data is of sufficient quality that it actually gives us a realistic or meaningful picture? A lot of effort is spent in data cleaning, and particularly this goes to the form in which data comes. A lot of standard systems still have some, at least, of their audit reports in PDFs, which really, from a data management perspective, is awfully challenging. Data ownership I mentioned before, but that's I think it's important to get that right from the outset, to understand which data is owned by whom, how is that data governed, who has responsibility for maintaining it, and for using it in different ways. And then interoperability, of course, we want to move towards more open systems where data is able to flow from one system to another in order to create more value from the data that we have. And as I mentioned, I think this is one of the things that I learned that's the most, probably almost more challenging than the technical issues, is this idea that in order to make best use of data, we need to change our culture, our approach towards, not just towards data, but towards our relationships with other organizations, with going from seeing ourselves as competitors to seeing the bigger value, the sustainability gains that we can achieve from having a more open data approach. And I think that's one of the fundamental issues facing society right now is whether we package these pieces of information up tightly within their firewalls and don't share them, or whether we make information more broadly accessible and potentially have it be used in ways that create value that we hadn't anticipated. So where are we now? What should we know already? And this, I have to say, this is a journey for sustainability standards. It's one where I hope and I think we're starting to see some real advances in terms of sustainability standards becoming better data managers. But at the same time, there's a long way to go. This isn't a traditional strength of sustainability standards. They're not first and foremost IT companies. And so we're starting from a fairly low bar, and we have to move quite rapidly to become better data managers. But some of the expectations that we have already is that standard systems make better use of the data that they do have. And this is particularly in relationship to the audit data, where one of the strengths of sustainability standards is that they're sitting on a lot of good information. And so you should be able to identify things like where are the critical issues in a given geography, where the issues are the elements of a standard that have no non-compliances. Rarely do we see them come up in audit reports as a problem. Can we increase the efficiency of our standards by streamlining and actually not focusing on those issues that are rarely a problem? In contrast, what are the hardest issues to comply with? Where are the ones that we see the most non-compliances? And then how do we use more analytics to detect things like fraud or incompetence? Incompetence is a harsh word, but basically, I mean where auditors are performing less well than other auditors. But the idea of using a lot of data to identify anomalies within that, I think, is quite powerful. And then ultimately looking at change in performance over time. What are the changes in practices and how have those come about as a result of complying with sustainability standards? So just to give you a couple of examples of what organizations are already doing, a lot of organizations within the ISO membership are analyzing the nonconformities or noncompliances within their systems and looking at how those change over time. So this is an example from the Sustainable Agriculture Network, looking at cocoa producers in West Africa. And you can see the change from the white dots to the gray dots. Essentially, the performance is improving as the levels move from right to left. And then Better Cotton Initiative, a second example, very much a data-driven system, an outcomes or metrics-based standard where they do collect a lot of data, and as such are able to do a lot of interesting analyses. This one being analysis of pesticide volume used and toxic load, comparing BCI farmers with comparison farmers. And you can break that down to individual farmer units. So there's a lot of powerful analyses that can be done with data that already exists within the systems. And so when we think about the data management cycle, the first step in that is data gathering. This is about getting the information in the door. And as I mentioned, from the risk management perspective, we're looking at how do we increase the range of different types of data points that can be triangulated and used to understand better the overall performance. It's things like georeferenced data, mobile data collection, so auditors or even the clients going out into the field or the factory floor and collecting information on a more frequent basis. All of that through mobile phone apps, georeferenced, automatically uploaded so that you get essentially a time-stamped real-time reflection on what's happening in the field at any given moment. Voice recognition software, that's a nice complement that some organizations are trying with their audit process. Anything to increase the efficiency, but also the reliability of the data that is coming in. More on the wish list end of the data gathering spectrum, drones, the use of drones, or even the Internet of Things to automate some data collection. That's still far off for most sustainability standards, but something that's worth exploring. And then a couple that are actually already in place: stakeholder input through social media platforms. You can imagine how common it is now for stakeholders, for people, real people, not stakeholders, real people to provide input to various platforms, whether those are commentary or updates on things that are happening. And you just look at any current top of news cycle, and there's a lot of social media input to provide a better, more robust picture of what's actually happening. So you can see that type of application used for performance in the field. Hey, I just went into this forest and I noticed a new area or a new road that was just put in that wasn't here the last time I was there. Those types of things are potentially very useful. And then similar to that, empowering workers through mobile technology, like some of the tools that we mentioned at the top of the webinar. And here again, just a couple of examples, or in fact just one example. This one from UTZ Certified. They are using a mobile-based farm management and monitoring system. This is more for the M&E side of their work, but it has direct applications for the audit process as well. In this case, although the map says Ethiopia, the project is for coffee and cocoa in Indonesia. And so I think one of the points that is important to integrate into any future improvement in the way we manage data is that we want to ensure that we're creating value from this data, not just for better management of the sustainability standard, but also for the client. So essentially changing the value proposition. And these are all examples that are already in place. Whether you're talking about self-assessment tools where the enterprise is assessing their performance and comparing it with peers or with others in the system. SAI platforms, farmer sustainability assessment is a good example. You've also got benchmarking against industry peers. The Sustainable Agriculture Network, Rainforest Alliance, is doing that, using external data to minimize client effort. This is an interesting one where, to what extent can you, in certain industries and sectors, collect data that is, or use data that's already being collected by another actor or for another purpose. Use that so that you don't duplicate the data collection required of your participating enterprises, and thereby reduce their level of effort. And Field to Market in the United States is an organization that's currently doing this. Audit data transparency. This is really about, again, sort of a same sort of issue where what you want is to try to move towards more open data. And to what extent can you make data from one data collection process, in this case the audit data, available for other purposes. And Fairtrade US is one of the organizations that's trying this, to try to make more of their audit data available for others to use in other audits, again, to reduce duplication and effort. And then some of the more exciting ones, and this maybe is sector specific, but I've got a couple of examples of this, of real-time performance data. And So one of our members, Gulf Environment Organization, they've been developing a on-course dashboard. This is for the social environmental performance on golf courses, and it enables users to see how they're performing against a number of social environmental areas, but then breaking it down into specific practices as well, based on data that they put in. And then taking it one step further, the U.S. Green Building Council originally had something called their LEED. LEED is the certification system, their dynamic plaque, which showed real-time performance against the 5 key areas that they evaluate. But that's been taken even a step further as they've split off an IT company called Arc Scoru. That the Arc platform now has even more real-time ability to provide analytics for well, a company, but a building. And I think this works particularly well in the built environment because of the ability to upload fairly continuous data about performance. So whether that's energy performance or water use, and that data goes into a platform that has some fancy analytics behind it and basically enables, it's a tool that companies can use to measure their performance in near real time. And that's kind of an ambition towards which I think a lot of sustainability standards and a lot of other sustainability tools are moving. And I think it's something that works better in some industries than others, but is certainly an inspiring example of what's possible. And finally, just thinking about the future, there are a number of areas where significant innovation is possible. And you can imagine that, again, there's a choice that we have to be making now about whether we gather all this information and get better at data analytics for our own benefit and have these parallel closed data systems, or whether we work towards open data and the possibility of understanding cumulative impacts and really seeing how information and data can be used in combinations and ways that we didn't anticipate that create more value for those that are affected. There's a lot of work being done and of course being led by Global Forest Watch, but also others to visualize data. It's tough to convince people with a spreadsheet, but show them a map and suddenly everything becomes real. And so the opportunities to visualize data and make it more easily understood and make it a more effective driver of change, I think is powerful. Traceability and transparency go hand in hand. The idea of all of those regulations and the focus on due diligence and understanding where products come from and performance of actors within supply chains, I think it's a really powerful driver, but we have to recognize that traceability and chain of custody in supply chains is actually mostly really poor still, and there's huge need for an opportunity for improvement of the tools that we use. I think sustainability standards have led the way with their chain of custody programs in opening up and making more transparent supply chains across numerous sectors, but there's still a long way to go and a lot of opportunity there for innovation. One of those innovations is blockchain and distributed ledgers, and I'm getting better at explaining what blockchain is. I'm not going to do it here, but it definitely is one of those ideas that sounds like it could be really powerful and is still very complicated, and where a lot of experimentation and field trials are happening. In the finance sector, it's fairly mainstream already, but imagine applying that to sustainability and the tracking of sustainability performance through supply chains, and it becomes really interesting as an alternative to existing traceability models. I think there's a lot of work to be done on common indicators and better outcome measures. It's certainly one where we're focusing a lot of energy with our members. And then one that's kind of, again, sort of for many people off in a distant future, or not distant future, but at least not in the next couple of years within the sustainability space. But the idea of predictive analytics and machine learning, I think, is becoming at least more common in other sectors, and seeing how we can get to the point where we have access to enough information that we can start to predict where are the risks of non-performance, where are the things that are going to prevent us from achieving our sustainability outcomes. And if we can anticipate those, we can engage and try to mitigate them before they become problems, and really move to a more proactive rather than reactive system. And I think that's intuitively really powerful. So those are just some of the thoughts I have about data and innovation. It really is an area of significant transformation, and it will impact not just sustainability standards, but all of us working in the sustainability space. And so if we can work together to really build that capacity, that competence, to understand what we can do with data, how to better manage it, and how to work in a more open and coordinated way to make the most value of that data. I think that's really powerful. One of the ways that we're going to take that conversation forward is through our upcoming Global Sustainability Standards Conference. It's at the end of this month in Zurich. It's called, the theme this year is the future of trust. A lot of conversations are going to be focused on not specifically data, although we do have a number of data streams, but really just all the aspects of how we think about trust and what that means, and how that's changing, and what the implications are for sustainability standards and others. Linked to that, I do want to mention we have our training workshops. These are usually very well attended, particularly around the conference, and a good introduction to, in one case, the essentials of sustainability standards, in the other, more monitoring evaluation, focusing on research design. So if you're interested in those, you can also check out our website for that. So I'll pass it back to Sidra for questions, and hopefully I've prompted a few ideas and thoughts within the audience. So thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick, for that presentation. I certainly feel like I learned a lot, and we're having a lot of questions coming in as well. So we'll just jump straight into it. Natalia asked a question about about the work that you were talking about earlier on in the presentation, which was about sharing and collecting data. And she asked, how is that work linked to the ICL Impacts Code?
Yeah, thanks, Natalia. So one of the interesting things is, and this is just probably a little bit more in my head than in reality right now, but I see that over time, the assurance process and the monitoring evaluation process are going to come closer together, that they ultimately are trying to achieve the same thing, which is to understand how performance is happening and changing over time. And so the impacts code is very much at the core of our M&E work, and something that I think provides a really good framework for standard systems to think better about how they manage data. Now, what we find in practice is that many organizations continue to have their monitoring evaluation teams or individuals quite separate from their audit teams, and there needs to be greater links and complementarity between those two activities. And some organizations were starting to see that, where the data that's collected through the audit process feeds monitoring evaluation, and the M&E systems provide useful data that's used by the audit process. So as I said, I'd like to see those two processes coming closer over time, in part because it also reflects the trend towards a focus more on outcomes data as being what people care about. How many trees were cut down? How many children were prevented from working in my supply chain? It's those very concrete pieces of data that I think are coming out of our M&E systems that become really powerful tools to drive change.
Thanks for that answer, Patrick. So I've got a question, another question here from Kelly, who's asking, how can ICL members collaborate to jointly apply data information towards their advocacy work to really be able to influence governments and their commercial partners?
It's a good question. I don't have a specific answer for you. I think it's a good thing to do. I think we're quite far off from people sharing data openly. Realistically, we're at the stage where organizations are trying to get a better handle on the information they do have and figure out how they can get better information. And so again, that focus on data basics is very much about making sure that they have the systems in place to adequately take advantage of the information that they have. And I think it's only then that you can start to think about sharing that information and using it for joint purposes like advocacy. So not a direct answer, but I think we're a ways off.
Thanks very much, Patrick. So we'll go to the next question now from Miyako, who's asking that, it is quite nice and interesting to hear that retailers and manufacturers are interested in using more data now for improving their impact and sort of, doing risk mitigation and capacity building as well with producers. But they want to know, is this really a quantified demand and is there really a real appetite from retailers and other businesses for these types of conversations around data?
It's always interesting to note that we work with many of the companies that are leaders in sustainability. They happen to be the large retailers and manufacturers, and they are out there working with sustainability standards and putting their own programs in place. And from those actors, it's very easy to get a perception that, yes, this really is important. There is an appetite for good data. And I think they're trendsetters, and in that way, there's some validity to that we're starting to see whether it's the Unilevers or the Marks and Spencers or the Mars of the world, that they are really willing to invest in getting good data and better understanding the impacts within their supply chains. But those are just a small minority of companies worldwide. I mean, if we talk about SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, there's hundreds of thousands of those. And they're not at our doorstep asking for better data management, but I think if we had the tools to provide them with better data, it would be something that they would be interested in. And again, I would look to the impact of these company leaders, these global sector leaders that really provide the path forward, and we certainly are seeing the demand from them.
Thanks, Patrick. So we'll go again to the next question from from Sabi, who's saying, we're getting better at collecting data, but does more data always imply trust? They are working in increasing technological capacity for standard systems and agree that just collecting more data requires more management. So Sabi wants to know, could you say what sort of work ICL is doing to actually increase understanding of data?
Oh, such a good question. So we've been doing these consultative workshops over the last few weeks with key stakeholders in different countries around the world to better understand where they think sustainability is going. And one of the comments from one of the participants that really stuck with me is there is so much focus on data collection and getting better data and all the new tools. If you think, okay, what are the tools that are going to be used in the future? The things that people come up with are all IT tools. They're all about getting better information. But better data and better information isn't change in and of itself. You know, it's the tool that enables change, but the actual action of changing practices still needs to happen. So to your question, I think it's very important that we see data as a means to an end, and to create more value from it, we have to first understand what we have. And I think that's where our focus is at the moment, is on giving our members, the sustainability standard systems, better tools to manage that data, to map it, to have systems in place that allows for management of it, analytics, and then on the analytics side, the monitoring and evaluation work that we do to support our members, I think is where we're really trying to help them to better understand the data that they have. But I think there's a lot of effort and space for us to explore how to make better use of that data, and always to keep in mind that this isn't the ultimate goal. It's the ultimate goal is not to collect the data, it's to make change as a result of what we're learning from it.
Thank you, Patrick. So I've got another question here from Fiska, who's asking, can self-assessment tools really provide the correct picture? Most people assess themselves differently to how other people would assess them, and how can we overcome this bias?
Yeah, quite right. So I think 2 points, 2 responses to that. One, it's important to see self-assessment data as one input in conjunction with other data sources. So you get this correlation or triangulation even, where you can test the self-assessment data to see where it is valid, where it's not, and how much you have to adjust or not rely completely on that data. But then secondly, there are ways that we can make that self-assessment data more robust. So thinking about the idea of time-stamped, geo-referenced photos. Self-assessment data isn't always, how do you think you did? But show me a picture of what's actually happening on the farm at this point in time. And so that's also data that the enterprise provides, but has some additional elements to it that make it more trustworthy. But ultimately, it is about combining different types of data in order to get that more robust picture.
Thanks again, Patrick. So I've got another question here from Michelle, who's asking if you can talk a little bit more about what the present activities are around the common indicators.
Yeah, I thought someone would ask me, and I really should know better. I'm going to say some things. Don't take it as 100% truth. If the M&E staff at ICL know that I've said something wrong, maybe they'll reach out and correct my advice or my answer. But on the collective indicators, we are working currently primarily with agricultural members. We have a set of indicators where it's really quite basic data points at this point, and a lot of the work is trying to figure out how to get the data in similar formats in ways that are interoperable. And I have to say, it's surprisingly difficult to move towards data that is interoperable. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're working through in this initial stage, is figuring out ways that we can streamline that process in the future, so that at least we have an ability to collect information through different systems and different platforms and data management tools that ultimately enable us to be able to compile that data and get that collective picture. But beyond that, in specific details, I'm afraid I should know but don't. So I'll look into that after this webinar.
Thanks, Patrick. So the next question is from Joaquin, who's asking, is there any open source project database related to audit findings which is managed by ISEAL, just about member data?
Yeah, quick answer is no. No, this is that culture change thing where audit data in particular, I mean, anyone who works with a number of different standard systems knows that the level of data that's shared about client performance is comparatively poor. There's still a sense of a lot of the audit data is proprietary. Companies don't want to share. Standard systems aren't willing to press them. And so you do get some examples where sustainability standards are starting to require more sharing of audit data results, but even those are fairly thin on the ground, and none of them would, I would say, constitute an open source of information.
Thank you, Patrick. So we'll go to the next question. I've got a question here from Ray, who's saying, hi, I'm setting up a standard for eel fishing sustainability. Should my company already start thinking about a data strategy even though we're so early on in the process?
Oh my God, yes, that is so great. Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's one of those things where sustainability standards will focus first on the standard, then on the assurance process, then maybe on the monitoring and evaluation. But we have to see these systems as a whole system, and underpinning that system is good data management, and that's everything from what needs to be in the contracts that you have with the certification bodies and that the certification bodies have with the clients about data management, data governance, what information needs to be shared, what's going to happen to that information. Thinking through those questions at the beginning puts you in such a better position for then having the data in the system in a way that's usable from the outset. And even then, thinking about, what's the implication of what data do we want to collect, or what data will we need? What implications does that have on the content of your standard? There's links between all aspects of the standard system and data. And I think it's something that could be quite powerful if ISEAL were to further develop tools and resources for helping sustainability standards think about what are the questions that need to be asked at what point in their development in order to have that good data management system in place to support all of the other functions. So yes, emphatically, yes.
Thanks, Patrick. I've got another question here from Maha, who's saying, from Maya, sorry. How do you think about mutual sharing of benefits? For example, in agricultural standards, there's often a lot of information gathered from producers, which is very valuable for others in the supply chain. What could be done to return the favor and share information with producers as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can imagine that's easier done within a system where already standard systems are, the data that they collect from producers or enterprises. They're making available back to those producers and enterprises in a way that creates value, that anonymizes overall average performance and allows the enterprise to compare their performance with their peers. But then if you think between systems, one of the things that could be valuable in terms of efficiency is to look at how external sources of data, so not data that you're collecting through your system or through the audit, but public sources of data or other external sources that give a picture of what are the critical issues in a geographic place, doing country-level risk assessments. Those types of external data sources can be very useful across systems and shared between systems. So not every standard system needs to go out and do their own risk assessment within a country, but rather can use a common system. And that's something we talked about recently in our risk approaches task force with members, is what external data is available and how can we collectively analyze that and make that information available across different sustainability standards, both to increase the efficiency but also the consistency within which we evaluate and apply data to risk analysis.
Great, thank you so much, Patrick. So I think we'll take the last question now as we're coming up to the hour now. I've got a question here from Brian who's saying, we're living in a world where nobody trusts expertise anymore. Facts and figures don't have the same weight. So how should people who are working in sustainability, who are experts, make themselves credible and heard?
Way to bring it right back to the theme at hand. The conversation today was data transparency and change, but the underlying theme or the sub-points were all about the changing nature of trust. And I think, my response to this is you have to believe that facts and figures are actually going to hold sway, and that the data is powerful and has the ability to change minds and hearts. And yes, we can get caught up in people not trusting data and trusting other sources of information that maybe don't have the same bases. But I think by and large, we still make our decisions based on good information. And to the extent that we can have good data, but then also put it into a format that is easy for people to understand, that convinces them, that comes through media that that people trust in inherently. It's the Hugh McLaren, the medium is the message, I think it was. This is about getting information to people in ways that that they trust, and that's changing. It's a lot about social media, but a lot of what we're talking about is what information are companies looking for, and on what basis are they making decisions about investments. And I think there it really is still and will continue to be increasingly about impacts and outcomes data, real information about change on the ground, real-time analytics. So I think there's a lot of benefit to be had from putting effort into getting better data out of these systems. And again, working collectively to do that, because we don't all want to have to create all this information ourselves, but be able to share that information and build off our collective efforts to get to more efficient achievement of sustainability. And so just one final note before we sign off here. I do want to note that Sidra, who many of you, if you've participated in these workshops, you're familiar with her calm and collected coordination of these webinars. And This is her last webinar with ICEAL. Unfortunately, she's unfortunate for us. She's chosen to leave the organization, move on to another exciting opportunity. And I just want to thank her for all her support in this webinar series and for the other communications work that she does. So thank you to Sidra, and thank you to all of you. And hopefully some things here were interesting. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to follow up with either with me or our communications team. And I look forward to seeing a lot of you in Zurich at the end of this month. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick. That's a very sweet message as well. Of course, I think it was good to hear also your messages about the future of credibility, and it's quite reassuring to hear about sustainability and the future of that as well. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today, and we hope that you'll join us again next time. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, I will be sending around a copy of the slides and the webinar recording in the next few days, so do watch out for that. And with that, I'd like to say goodbye. Bye, everyone.